listener production.
Hey, Benzion Siebert here with The Briefing. Childhood and dementia aren't two words you'd expect to hear together, but about 90 kids die from childhood dementia each year in this country. That's about the same number of children that die from cancer. Although children can present differently, typical symptoms of childhood dementia include memory loss, confusion, behavioural issues, disturbed sleep, fear and anxiety. It's a heartbreaking condition that has historically received little attention and not enough research hours. But the Childhood Dementia Initiative is trying to raise awareness, and a new grant will see further research into the disease. Meg Maack is the CEO and founder of the initiative. She's also the mum of 2 children with a type of childhood dementia, Sanfilippo syndrome. Isla is 15 and Jude is 13. Here's Antoinette Latouffe's chat with Meg Maack.
So tell me about your kids, Isla and Jude.
Oh, they're crazy. They're like, on some days I think they're just typical kids, you know, they fight like siblings. My 15-year-old's moody and gives me attitude. My 13-year-old's, you know, full of energy and running around the house, but they're not like typical 15 and 13-year-olds. My daughter Isla has been fighting, I guess, or battling with Sanfilippo syndrome, a form of childhood dementia. She was diagnosed 11 years ago and she is now 15 and probably has the cognitive abilities of maybe a 7-month-old, but in a body that still works like a 15-year-old. She can still move, she can still run, she can still pick up, you know, little items, but her cognition isn't there. We've lost a lot of the function and the personality and the sassy little girl that she once was over the last 11 years. And Jude is 2 years behind her, seems to be faring reasonably well, but he is also declining with Sanfilippo syndrome. He was diagnosed when he was just 2 and we tested him because she'd received a diagnosis and we knew that there was a risk that he also had it too.
So what exactly is Sanfilippo syndrome?
So it's a genetic condition that's caused by a single fault in the children's genes. We all have faults in our genes. I had a fault in one of my genes and my kid's dad had a fault in one of his genes, the same gene. And we both passed the faulty one when we had both of the children. So we could have actually had healthy children. There was a 1 in 4 chance any pregnancy we had together would result in this condition. We weren't aware of that risk. We didn't know that we were carrying these mutations. Children are born seemingly healthy. They hit their early milestones. And certainly in my kid's case, up until the age of 2.5, there was nothing that was ringing any alarm bells for anybody. When my daughter was around 2.5, I'd already had my son and we started to notice a bit of a slowing in her development. It started with language, but it flowed on to other things. And eventually at about 4, she was considered to have what they call a global developmental delay. You know, I was running around trying to figure out what was going on, being the typical, you know, neurotic mother.
Caring mother.
Well, yeah, but it's interesting because all of the mums that we talk to describe a period of time where they're really not listened to, really dismissed, and really, you know, often walk away feeling like something's wrong with me because I think there's something wrong with my kid. And so that diagnostic odyssey, as we've come to know that it's called, for us took about 18 months, which is reasonably quick. And she was eventually diagnosed when she was 4. And Jude, we gave testing to because we wanted to make sure he didn't have it. But unfortunately, he also inherited the same genetic mutations. So basically, you know, my daughter could read, she could talk, I mean, small sentences. She was sort of 4 or 5 level reading. And over time, that development slowed, plateaued, and now she's losing the skills. So losing the ability to talk. She's pretty much lost all of her language now, losing her cognition. So all of the milestones that, you know, we celebrate in our children, we have counter milestones where, you know, all of those firsts, the first word, the first step, we're now looking at the lasts, and they're starting to decline more and more every day. The life expectancy is somewhere between 12 and 20 for their particular form of childhood dementia, Sanfilippo syndrome. As a whole, kids with dementia all die prematurely, and actually 50% will die before their 10th birthday. So, you know, there's a spectrum. Yeah.
What's it like raising children, you know, that are unlikely to make it to adulthood?
That's such a good question, because I actually spent a lot of time with my therapist on that, because to me, parenting was all about preparing my kids for the world, instilling values, letting them grow into be who they are, and preparing them to go out into the world and let go of them. And so to parent a child who isn't going to go out into the world, isn't going to live into adulthood, often felt to me really futile.
Yeah.
And where I landed after a lot of therapy was actually I've reframed what I think about parenting. And parenting for me now isn't about shaping the human to become an adult and go out into the world. To me, parenting is about making my child feel secure, loved, and giving them as much opportunity to be themselves and explore their worlds, which are reasonably small in my kids' case, and maintain the joy and maintain the happiness as much as we can.
In terms of maintaining that joy and happiness and their quality of life, what are the treatment options currently available?
There aren't any. And this is the most tragic thing about these conditions is children are diagnosed often late when the symptoms are already quite significant, and there's no treatment. So families are told, take your child home, make the most of them, go and make memories. That's the advice a lot of the doctors will give children. The only opportunity that kids have to access treatment in their lifetime if they have one of these conditions is on clinical trial for emerging therapies, and there are so few of them. Globally, I think last year there was 54 clinical trials running for the different conditions. There's 140 different childhood dementia disorders. There were only 2 available in Australia, and no new ones started next year. So we have a really big problem where historically, there has been a real underinvestment in research, which has meant that, over the last 20 years where we've seen paediatric cancer death rates halve, we've seen the life expectancy of cystic fibrosis double, we've seen no notable improvement in the survivorship of any of these conditions that cause dementia in children.
Why do you think there's such little discussion, let alone funding in this area?
I think the simple answer for that is we've all been focused for far too long on the individual conditions. And we've been very clever as a scientific and medical community in understanding the genetic cause of these rare conditions. And they are all individually rare. So instead of thinking about these as a collective and what are the things that are common across them and where can we get economies of scale or learn, from the different conditions, in the way that we've seen progress happen beautifully in cancer, we've been looking at the individual conditions. We've been looking at Sanfilippo syndrome, Batten disease, Niemann-Pick C. We haven't been considering them as a collective, looking at the needs of the families that are consistent across all of them, sharing research infrastructure. And I think that fragmentation has always also meant that we've been really invisible. We've been lost in these silos, and the articulation of our needs and the discussion has never happened because we'd have to have it 140 times. So what we're saying is if you bring these conditions together, because they are consistent in their symptoms, they are consistent in a lot of the disease mechanisms, we can start to have a conversation about how do we make a change to all of these conditions.
In terms of all the variations of childhood dementia, how common is Sanfilippo?
It's one of the more common ones.
Yeah.
There are 140 different forms of childhood dementia. Sanfilippo is probably, within the top 5 in terms of how common it is, but it is still extremely rare, as they all are. Some of the conditions within that 140, they have like one case known in the world. So they're very unique.
Well, the latest grant we've seen is from the South Australian government, and that's in partnership with the Little Heroes Foundation. That's $500,000 will go into research into childhood dementia at Flinders University. Like, what kind of impact can this kind of funding have for these conditions?
So we know that historically funding has been a major problem for research. When we launched the Childhood Dementia Initiative, the government actually did a call for childhood dementia research, federal government, for a $3 million call, which is a reasonably small amount of funding. But that resulted in 5 individual projects. And this latest round of funding, which has come from the South Australian government and philanthropic funding, will add to that. So there's another project that's happening. Potentially, looking at the work that's happening in Flinders, and Kim Hemsley is an incredible researcher who 10 years ago when I met her, she was already leading the field. So potentially, there could be things that come out of that particular investment. There could be drugs identified that could make a real difference to a number of the conditions that fall under the childhood dementia umbrella. We need to have this continued momentum in funding into research, and we need to be funding projects like this on a large scale, and also integrating that with improvements in care for families as well.
Obviously, you would love to see in the next few years, at a time that will help your family, some treatment options or drug options. But in lieu of that, what sorts of things have you prepared yourself for as your children's dementia worsens? Like, what do you know from other families and from the research? Like, will there be a time where they don't know who you are, where they'll be unable to walk? What are you preparing for?
I mean, if I'm really honest, and I am honest, my kids won't benefit from the research that's happening now. It's a simple fact. They've progressed too far in their dementia. And what we're understanding now is early intervention is absolutely critical. By the time most kids present with and have symptoms, strong enough for a diagnosis, it's almost too late. We need to be getting these kids younger, and that's why the newborn screening and other things that we're advocating for are critical. So I'm preparing my family for the continued decline. We've recently done mods to the house to allow for wheelchairs because we know that that's coming. As I mentioned earlier, my daughter has already lost her speech. I don't know. Does she know who I am? I think she knows, she recognises I'm somebody and I'm significant. She smiles when she sees me, but I don't know. She doesn't call me mummy anymore. There will come a time where she will be gone, but still here. And that incremental loss is something that we've been managing as a family for 10 years. The children that are at my house now are very, very different to the children who were at my house 10 years ago. And so those gradual losses are something actually I think most people don't understand. They understand grief and bereavement and when somebody dies, but the incremental losses of a person is something that society in general don't really understand. And one of the psychologists in our field described it as the disintegration of humanity. And, I think that's just the most apt way to describe what we're watching. So they will eventually stop walking and, feeding becomes a problem. Eventually swallowing becomes a problem. The majority of children end up with respiratory issues. So a lot of kids die from pneumonia or renal failure or other kind of body system failures that accompany the dementia. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all the work you're doing and also for sharing your family's journey.
Thank you.
Meg Maack, who's the CEO and founder of the Childhood Dementia Initiative. It's not often that I'm at a loss for words, but I guess I'm just processing her experiences, her generosity, Meg's generosity in sharing her family's journey, but also her commitment to raising awareness and funds for childhood dementia, knowing that anything that becomes available, any treatment options, won't benefit her children because, as she said, it's too late. Early intervention is key. So I think she's just an incredible person, and so many others will benefit from all the work that she does.
That's it for the briefing today. We'll have another episode for you from 6 a.m. tomorrow. In the meantime, hit follow so you never miss an episode. I'm Ben Sion Siebert. Thanks for listening.